Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Hinterling, and you are listening to Watch This List. Today is a very special episode of Amy's Progress, in which I have not one, but two guests, my buddies, Frank and Tyler, whom I am in a very spirited group chat with on a daily basis. And we were talking about Nolan. I can't remember why. I think this devolved from like something else that Tyler was talking about. And then I thought, you know what? If anybody can convince me to like this movie, it's these guys. And I did rewatch it. I didn't like it as much the second time as I did the first. But actually, I think that it was because I couldn't connect to the characters emotionally. And that's something that, Frank, you said that upon rewatch, that was like the main thing that worked for you.
Mm-hmm. That is true. So that's
Yeah.
surprising to hear. I've now seen the film 9 times, which is what the 9th watch is what I finished not that long ago. I think the thing that actually deepens is feeling closer to the characters and their personal emotional stakes and viewing it more from a human or emotional level than just being awe-inspired by its filmmaking, which that has been present since viewing 1 and also just remains top tier upon every watch. But yeah, I think the thing that I find myself being more drawn into is the emotional center of the film. So
Which you feel like is it across the board the same, or do you feel like it's nuanced?
what do you mean? Is
Like the emotionality of the characters, do you feel like you relate to different people in different ways, or do you feel like it just brings it out in a different way because you're not paying attention to the production side so much?
it's the latter for
Okay.
sure. I think
Okay.
it's not so much that I like personally relate to them because their identities are, other than Kat, she gets pretty defined in her life and her wants, her desires, her specific emotions. But even her and everyone else, they seem to represent more philosophical ideas per Nolan's usual bag, and getting closer to a like universal truth that exists in each one of them more so than anything, I guess, where I can just connect on a it's like pure emotionality more than it's like empathetic, if that makes sense. uh
Yeah,
so,
well, and
go ahead.
go ahead.
No,
Well, I was going to say Tyler could comment on that too, because I know that he is an emotional person and likes for things to be big. So how did that come across to you, Tyler, on your sixth rewatch, which was today?
Yeah, I've seen it 6 times. So
Yes.
Just thinking about the film, like when I first saw it in theaters, it came out. It was kind of a controversial release, coming out like right in the midst of COVID and everything. I had a pretty positive reaction to it, and then the more I kept rewatching it, the more I found myself connecting. A little different from Frank, because Frank seems to be connecting more to all sorts of characters in the film. I tend to, I think, the more I watch it, really find the core of the movie in, well, one, the philosophy of what Nolan is playing around with, and then two, the relationship between Neil and the protagonist is really what kind of cracks it open for me. So,
In what sense?
I just think it's the heart of the movie. Is this sort of heroic individuation, sacrifice, friendship in the face of doom and destruction and annihilation.
It's like friendship saves the world. Do you,
literally,
Frank?
though.
Do you think that they're like? I mean, I read a bunch of people who think they're like in love. I don't know if we could go that far, but do you think that they're like two sides of the same coin sort of thing, or do you think it's a different sort of relationship?
Well, I mean, I do think there's a love, and it's not, I don't think it's a romantic love. It feels like a brotherly love, or it turns out to almost be a paternal child love, but one half of that equation doesn't even know that's what's happening right now. The whole movie, when you rewatch it, maybe what does enriching is Neil's specific journey, because you know he's at the end of his journey while the protagonist is clearly at the beginning, because he's our audience vessel that we're seeing the story linearly through one time. But by the end, what we realize is like there's loops upon loops upon loops that are going to have to keep happening in order to make sure this event always happens. And so we get to witness Neil's end of his heroic journey, where he's knowingly going to go make his final sacrifice. And so, like, the first time you see the two of them together, Neil's known this person for an indeterminable amount of years, and you can see how much like pressure is on his face of like, okay, like I have to not screw this up, and we have to like basically fall in love, and we have to trust each other, and we have to do this journey. But you're the one that told me that. So there's this constant ebb and flow between them that is based around like knowledge and purpose and truth, and trying to augment a better reality. So it's a complicated relationship between the two of them.
And it's kind of the inverse of like Teddy and Leonard, because Teddy and Leonard have that dynamic. Teddy has had this conversation multiple times. He's known Leonard for an indeterminate amount of time. In that sense, it's more like he's using him, but still it's a very similar dynamic where the other person's like, I feel like I just met you. And the other one has this long memory of history. And then trying to, like you said, like endear yourself to somebody so they trust you enough to do what you need to do is also very challenging.
That's a great point, and something, even though I've always felt that since seeing Tenet, that like Memento, Inception, and Tenet is like checking in at like different chapters of Nolan's life on the same thematics, and how it's evolved from a pretty nihilistic place in Memento to this like wide-eyed optimism in Tenet of a belief in humanity. And that is interesting. It definitely functions like an inverse, because Teddy ends up almost exclusively abusing their relationship, and it comes back to burn him.
And it comes back to him. Yeah. Tyler, what do you think about this theory?
Yeah.
I knew it.
I think I agree.
Yes.
His I would say you see Nolan at his most optimistic exoterically, externally in Interstellar.
That's true.
Intrinsically, though, I think that Tenet is just as optimistic, if not actually more optimistic than Interstellar.
Okay, just because you feel like the motivations are more like noble, or like they're more pure than malicious.
Yeah, there's a heroic quality. Well, there's a heroic quality to the characters in Interstellar. Obviously, they're, interstellar explorers and astronauts, and they're going out, and there's an element of heroism to, exploring the terra incognita, or the unexplored, for the good of humanity. I'm not saying that's not heroic, but I think that there is more of an internal. I mean, Interstellar is literally an external trajectory of the characters, leaving their reality to find a better reality. These characters are actually operating within the structure of the understanding that the future is doomed, and they're still fighting for it no matter what. It actually reminds me a little of the IMF, and the way the IMF was kind of portrayed in Dead Reckoning Part 1,
yes.
which I guess is just Dead Reckoning now, because I think they're changing the title of the next one.
Whatever. Oh, jeez.
But like the way the IMF was presented there, you're building out more of a mythology, and in these ideas of these being heroes for the planet and for humanity. And I guess that ties into this sort of being Nolan's Mission Impossible movie as well, because you do get several heists, and they're amazing.
Definitely his James Bond movie, Mission Impossible.
I was about to say that, Frank. I think you said that maybe in your review, or I do remember reading that somebody was like, this is his take on Bond. Like that international feel, as well as just like the look of it is so luxury, everybody's like A game.
With the stakes as big as the world ending, you gotta have the biggest stakes of location and physical movement through space and time. And I think the only thing I'd like to add is I feel like Interstellar's from a reactionary perspective, and Tenet is almost from a forward preventative perspective. Like, sure, there's what Tyler brought up, like the end of the world is confirmed because the future is trying to rewind time in Tenet. Like, that we screwed up the future so bad they're trying to retreat to the past. So it's like a confirmed annihilation, doom and gloom, but there's that standing in defiance of that supposed truth and wanting to do better, where Interstellar is like, hey, it's pretty bummed here, let's figure out what to do because our past is totally annihilated, we need to create a new future. So they almost mirror each other in interesting ways with Interstellar and Tenet. I think I just often don't compare the two because I'm not very fond of Interstellar, but
Me neither.
that's my
But I
own
appreciate
biases.
Tyler's. Yeah. Well, and obviously it relates to Oppenheimer too, which Tyler, you were talking about with the, not only do they quote him in Tenet, but it seems like it's foreshadowing for that sort of opus to come out of it.
Yeah, my buddy made the comment when we saw it in 70 millimeter film. He came out and he said that was Nolan. Tenet is Nolan doing a reverse pincer movement on himself without realizing it, inspiring himself to make Oppenheimer, which would make more sense in a like within the context of his career to come before Tenet, but they're kind of backwards in a way. So,
which is ironic,
is appropriate,
very appropriate.
Though for shame that people will disregard Tenet and not give it another couple fair shakes or anything because it came out at the wrong time in the wrong place, so it always has this like stink on it. And of course it pretty much is his most experimental and obtuse movie, I suppose, but that's what draws me to it.
Is just like, well, and I just thought of Mission Impossible too. That's another connection, Tyler, because I think Tenet was delayed in the same way that Cruise's movie was, and then there was this whole big thing of like Cruise going to the movies with his mask on, and it was Tenet.
It's the funniest video that exists.
The connection.
Yeah, so that's pretty subconscious of you. Okay, so tell me why you guys think that it's like top tier Nolan. Like I want to know like what the passion is coming from, what you relate to. I know that we chatted about like the predestination angle. So Frank, if you want to go first, maybe tie that in if you can, like in terms of like the choice, the whole thing about like the future coming back, but you still being able to determine things.
Well, first things off the bat, why I think it is the best Nolan movie, and genuinely at this point in my top 20 of ever, a lot of it has to do with the filmmaking of it. So like we can push that to the side, like in just a blanket statement of I think it's almost unparalleled in practical filmmaking. Like there's like 2001, like Return of the King, and then this in my head of like three examples of like we just did it. We just went out there and did it, and like the scope and the imagination and the spectacle, like just unparalleled. It makes my head hurt trying to process in real time what the hell is going on. I was just about to say that.
It's unfathomable. And
it like, and I know for a fact.
Yeah. Oh, action sequences moving forward and backwards at the same time, and depending on where you are in the, I mean, obviously that's the gimmick, but then you look slightly deeper. It's like depending on where you are subjectively within the scene, which character you're with, it also changes. The momentum of that scene. So palindromic action sequences shot practically forwards and backwards, it makes my head hurt too. So it is just incredible.
The middle sequence where they finally reverse time actually happens almost exactly halfway through the movie, and it lasts itself exactly is a 20 minutes. Yeah, it's unreal.
Come on, Amy.
Meticulous planning beyond belief and unparalleled even by Nolan, who's constantly trying to one up himself in this department, and I think that's his pinnacle. Anyway, so that aside, because I know that's not what we're really supposed
what we're emphasizing. No, but but it's true. Also, I'll add that Memento is also that way, with the bullet going back in the gun and the reverse Polaroid. I mean, obviously Nolan has a preoccupation with time, but that movie is also that sort of thing. And I listened to that entire commentary of him talking about how they wanted to make that as real as humanly possible. So he is obviously very, probably, I mean, like Kubrick, where they just prefer things to be as real as they can be.
Totally. And there's definitely that work clearly put into Tenet. And again, with his other films, like Interstellar's no slouch there with, anyway. So thematically though, what
Yeah,
definitely,
thematically.
it's what we were talking about, where it's standing in defiance to what you're being told is an imperative truth, and knowing, because you're if you we all know we're going to die, like that's an objective fact, but to deal with the concept of humans are going to die is an extra layer of like existential angst and anguish that like you it's becoming more and more to our current reality a pressing conception of like we have to face this and reckon with this and try to do something about this if we want our species to continue. Of course, there's always the arguments of like maybe we don't, and then that's, a conversation for your own day. But to me, I do somewhere deep down, no matter how dark and nihilistic I can get within myself, I do believe in the concept of humanity as a whole. So I view things that are promoting that you might have to do something in your own life, and it could be a sacrifice, it could be just helping someone out, it could be a myriad of things, but that you have to take action to try to better that inevitable future that is going to come, but it doesn't have to come at any specific time or day. Because again, theoretically, humans will cease at some point no matter what, but if it's by our own hand, that's a tragedy. If it's by the natural order of the universe, that's just a God's plan or whatever else you want to call
Like
it.
inevitability.
Yeah, and then that feels more harmonious and a beautiful way to think about our existence as people. And I know it's like a goofy movie with a lot of silly lines and like awkward deliveries and like a James Bond movie for all intents and purposes, but it's like that's at the core of what he's struggling with. It's staring down the end of humanity and going like, but what can I do? And Christopher Nolan is just a filmmaker, and he's just a filmmaker though who happens to have the largest stage in the world for at least original movies. Like for sure, nobody is above him in budget and attention and control. Like
Except
he's
for what's his name? DV. But yes,
I
Dune.
disagree because he's doing
Oh,
adapted material. Tenet's an original property. He's
true.
fully
I just
creating his
meant in
own.
terms of like having access to being able to do whatever on earth he wants at this point, and we will all go. But yes, you're right.
I think
OG.
he's getting there. I don't know if
Yeah,
he's there yet. I think we'll have to wait a few more years and see how it turns out.
turns out.
But then to take this, what is theoretically the biggest topic we could address in a film, and being like, okay, I will wrestle with it. And I guess there is a continuation to that with Oppenheimer by trying to pull it back to our tangible reality with like bombs and consequence of the creation of them, but like it's extends through the conceptions of Tenet as well. It's all right there. I think any emotionality and philosophy that can be pulled from Oppenheimer is also easily inside of Tenet, and it just might require the audience to get there themselves more than the movie just telling you, hey, this is the existential angst we're dealing with.
Well said. Tyler, what do you love about this movie? Why is it your number one favorite?
um, ooh, that's a broad question.
How does
I
it
think,
emotionally resonate with your aesthetic taste?
yeah, I think Frank kind of kind of cracked that conversation open about like nihilism,
Mm-hmm.
on a subjective level and on the level of humanity. And the fact that, yeah, like Frank said, humans die. And there is a reading of the whole entire scientific project. The whole entire Enlightenment is a response to that, of us trying to, unveil the secrets of nature and control them, the laws of nature and control them in order to, in a way, prevent death. which may be the final goal of the scientific movement. A lot of people don't think about it that way. They think about it very immediately, like make medicine, right? Okay,
Right.
great.
But that's
But
to
what's that
prolong
for?
life.
Right. That right.
Right.
So you're prolonging life.
Good point.
That's one way to look at it. Now, the unintended consequences of something like that, I think Nolan gets into that in Oppenheimer, but I think it's also tied in to Tenet. So the unintended consequences of revealing the secrets of nature in the natural world and using those laws of nature for progress and for whatever progress may be and for the good of humanity. And then watching, I mean, the reason why I liked Oppenheimer so much was because I thought it was just so dreadful, not the movie, although I'm not sure
No,
where.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was just so full of dread because you're watching a man who wants to do better for mankind or for humanity or for people try to do that, but then it's being kind of, there's a naivete there where it's being co-opted and used by Machiavellian forces that exist up from above him that only work to reinforce the nature of humans, which is of course brutish conflict if Thomas Hobbes has anything to say about it. So that's kind of a whole entire conversation that Nolan is having. I think it starts here in Tenet. I think he is reconciling with being itself, which is no small feat for an action movie that, again, moves forwards and backwards through time in the most ridiculous ways, is his James Bond movie, is his Mission Impossible movie. All of these things, has a character named the protagonist, for God's sake. I mean, that's so goofy, but it's so great. All of that is still working to reinforce this concept, I think, of turning away from the nihilistic void, looking at life for all of its inherent flaws and the suffering of life, and looking at it straight on and saying, yes.
Okay, so in terms of the way that it is structured with time, how does this contribute to that optimism overall? Because when I first saw it, I thought that it was just sort of gimmicky, like that Nolan was just having them do backwards and forwards as a sort of like a way to have it be an action movie and a more compelling one, but not necessarily like contributing to the philosophy of the film. Like, do you guys actually think, if you think this, in what way do you think that the way that it goes backwards and forwards and how there's sort of like two selves, you're fighting your future self and your present self, and then your future self knows that it's going to be doing that, but you don't. Is there any depth there that's more than just this is cool sort of thing for you guys?
Tons.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Tons,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, in what ways? Frank, you go first, and then Tyler.
I mean, it's a line in the movie for sure. Like that. This watch, I thought a lot about Arrival, to bring DV back into the conversation for the first time.
Yeah.
I hadn't made that connection, but like all the themes of Arrival really do apply here, where we live in a stream where cause comes before effect, and that is always how we perceive our reality. And this is a movie that's like, when you pull out, that's not the truth. Like when you look back at something, it's just what it was, and now you have to reinterpret what that means and what it could mean. And same thing when viewing a future, like if time's a flat circle and whatever that means, like when we come back to it, it's examining that. So it's coming back to what we started talking about in the beginning of predeterminism and free will, and how does one interact with the other. And then that's the conflict that the protagonist is constantly coming up against through these action scenes and these conversations and this developing plot. But it's all playing inside of the metaphorical or philosophical playground structure of facing, coming up to these moments of having to understand that both exist simultaneously. You are in full control of your life as much as it's already what it is. Like, and these two things will always keep coming together. So the idea of we're both going forward and backwards through time is to try to recognize and reconcile that the present is stuck between two things that don't exist, but concretely also do. Like, the future will happen and the past already has, but then when you're in this present moment, neither matters, but they both are completely what's influencing right now too. What I just did is influencing me now, and also what I think I'm about to do is influencing me just as much. So to live a full human experience, you can't only live in the present, you can't only live in the past, you can't only think about the future. Like, it's about finding the balance of all three that need to collapse on each other for us to find the full breadth of our understanding of ourselves and the world and others inside of it too. I hope that answered your question. I think it did.
That was beautiful.
Nice.
Tyler, you can piggyback on that, but that was great, Frank.
Not to bring Denis Villeneuve back into it, but standing at the top of the dune, being able to see the past and the future, as we saw in Dune Part 2, that sort of visual metaphor that he throws in there during the Water of Life sequence, pretty pertinent here. Mm-hmm. The past and the future. So, what is time, I guess, is a good question to start with.
Pull out your chalkboard.
Yeah, so here we go. No, I view time as a rule. It's a limitation in a way. I actually mentioned this in my most recent review of the movie. It is a limitation within which we operate as people. And whether we like it or not, the world needs limitation. I've actually had this conversation with people before, where if we think about Tenet as Christopher Nolan's theodicy, so his argument that justifies being itself, John Milton puts it like in Paradise Lost being his theodicy, which it's debatable whether it was or not, but because he's doing other things there with the character of Satan. But Milton says, I'm going to justify the ways of God to man, and we don't need to worry about necessarily what God is in this case. Definitions of God. If we view God as being itself, perhaps maybe that we could go down that route. Being itself is order, chaos, balanced. You see this in The Dark Knight, right? You see the hero on one side of the coin and the antagonist, the villain, on the other side of the coin, Joker and Batman. So it's order and chaos. It's good. It's evil. And so people will look at that and they will say, that they'll argue that there are all sorts of theological arguments and theodicies about, being itself is inherently flawed. And why would a God who is all good and all knowing and all powerful create a world in which, us measly humans exist inside of it and have to suffer and things like that? I think all of that is kind of sophomoric thinking. I think it's getting at something. It's so close to discovering the truth, which is just that being itself is a hand of cards that we have to deal with whether we like it or not. You don't really get to argue with God, I guess, is another way to say it. And again, you don't have to like that you don't get to argue. Okay. And sometimes you actually do get to argue, but we see that bear itself out in metaphorical biblical tales like Cain and Abel, for instance. Like, Cain views he's not making the proper sacrifices, and he lashes out at being. He lashes out at God by killing his brother. And I actually view that as what Sator is doing in this movie. In a way, he is lashing out at being, knowing that our assured end is doom and destruction. He looks at that, and he talk about that nihilistic void. He falls headlong into it, Mephistopheles in Faust says maybe it would be better for everything to just not be, essentially, right? And that's a legitimate temptation. I mean, people struggle with that idea. I mean, how many people who we can think of, maybe it's a dark topic to bring up, but suicide, like, I think that's what people are contending with. Obviously mental illness and all sorts of things, but like, being is hard, existing is difficult, and there are lots of people who opt out of it, and that is what Sator is kind of doing. He's annihilating existence on his terms, and that's dark, man. I mean, that's like Columbine shooter territory. Like, when you read what the Columbine shooters, or any mass shooter, that's what they're doing. They're kind of lashing out at being and the fact that existence is difficult. Where the heroes of the story find themselves, I think they find themselves within that reality. So it is true, like, being is hard, being is difficult, and the temptation that opens up the path of going down the Sator route, or the Mephistopheles route of annihilating existence, or the curse or the mark of Cain. I guess you could consider it that way. But then there's the other route that opens up as well, which is the heroic choice, and there's free will there, right? The heroic choice, perhaps, to not end it all on my terms, but to make the sacrifices that count for the people that you love. The protagonist and Neil, for instance, I love that Frank brought up that they love one another. It's a fraternal and a paternal love there. And so Neil's sacrifice at the end of the film, in this twilight world, is the ultimate act, ultimate Christ-like act. Christ's sacrifice in the Bible is there it is. That's the pinnacle of the story of Christianity. Of course, it's how it's been utilized and retconned and whatever, but the story itself, that's the pinnacle of the Christian story, the Judeo-Christian tradition, whatever you want to call it. Like, that sacrifice and then the redemption, right? And I see that in the sacrifice that Neil makes. I'm using a lot of loaded religious terminology. I don't know that Nolan is necessarily religious, but I view his sort of metaphysical view, or perhaps his metaphysical philosophy of things, as how would you say it? It's not necessarily Christian. It's not necessarily conservative at all, but it's pulling or pushing forward the message that things matter, and that we matter, and that humans exist, and it's okay to suffer. How we can mitigate that suffering is a different story, and I think that's part of the scientific problem or project. But that heroic choice to fight and not crumple underneath those pressures, to try to actively forge a better future, is a deeply, deeply beautiful kind of twist at the end of the film, because it is kind of a twist. But yeah, so it's very much playing into the postmodern nihilistic void that we find ourselves in today. And that idea of time being a limitation that we exist within, that's very much kind of the postmodern idea, the postmodern world that we live in. They start with a true statement, and that is that there are an unlimited amount of interpretations of the world around us. That's true. But then they make that leap that I think is ultimately false. That is, no particular interpretation can be placed over any other one. And I don't think that's right. Because there is embedded in Tenet an interpretation of the world that is better than another interpretation of the world, which is that Neil and the protagonist are, the good guys, the protagonists. It's in his name, the protagonist. And Sator and the people in the future who are actively trying to annihilate the past, annihilate the world, snuff out humanity in this sort of, anti-natalist kind of environmental nightmare that they find themselves in, um, that's not good, right? So obviously the heroes need to fight for the good. And so the good exists. And this is a movie that posits that good exists, even though the world is hard, and that suffering exists. Good also exists. So, anyway, that was a long explanation for your question.
Well, I do have a quick thing I'd like to interject before we allow Amy to
Talk.
get back to it. I think I resonated with a lot of what you were just talking about on the last couple watches, and I even in my notes today was like, it is a religion. Like Tenet itself is a religion inside of its own world, and I am not a religious person. I would call myself spiritual to whatever extent that means, and I think the idea of what that means for Tenet and what you're talking about, like what Nolan's placing in there, it's that idea of like you have to have faith. And to a degree, he's almost promoting that you have to have a blind faith, which is what most religions ask you to go with them on. Like you have to just put your hands up and say like it's either you believe this or you don't, and even when it doesn't make sense you have to keep choosing to believe it, which is what Tenet is constantly bucking its own I should say the protagonist is bucking his own head against. He doesn't get it, he wants to get it, he makes mistakes because he wants to get it, but then it turns out he was always doing the right thing and it was always for the right cause. It's a by not making about religion, by not making about like a specific, because that works for a metaphor for being a soldier in the army even, and you can pick any lane. Filmmaking, it works as a metaphor for, from a top, anything that's like a top down hierarchical view of the universe where you have to just have faith that what you're doing is the right thing. It gets dicey the more specific you make these things and start to write out rules and laws and whatever. Like it can fall apart just as quick as it can be a miraculous, beautiful thing. But Nolan is just taking the core idea of that if we don't have a blind faith in humanity as a whole, we are just succumbing to that doom that you were starting to highlight. So I just wanted
Okay,
to.
but Frank, I have to say, it's a thought that just occurred to me. I don't know if you'll agree with this, but since the characters in the future can actually interact with the past, it's not quite the leap of faith, blind faith thing that we're talking about here, because there's actually a sort of a supernatural thing going on where a different reality can intersect, because blind faith, it means that you have no idea what the future holds, and this movie you definitely know what it holds, and it's like coming into play.
No. They're defying the truth that they know. They're having a blind faith that what they're doing will change the future, because the future is saying we give
Okay.
up, and
I see what you're going with this.
we're going back into the past. There's no other answer. You screwed up. And the past is responding by saying like, I will not accept that. I will not accept this truth you're telling me that
I'm
we
not sure I would
can't.
use the word faith for that, because that seems more like delusion to me.
Well, do
than
we want to
faith.
start talking about religion?
Okay, well, yeah.
It's all the
Tyler,
same. I'm just saying that we have to have purpose.
not for me, Frank.
We have to have purpose, and we have to have our own truth, and we have to have an accepted reality we share with others and a perceived reality we carry ourselves out through, which most people will funnel through some system of belief. One, no matter what, actually, not some, all people will funnel it through a system of belief. Whether you want to say atheism isn't its own religion, like just because it's not organized doesn't mean it's not the same
A
as
belief
being
system.
any major religion you want to pick. Like it's all
Sure.
conceptually the same thing. So the faith is put into humanity itself, and to believe we can do something about the future. Like I think it is all the same, no matter how you want to present it or what works best for an individual. That's why it's like
Say it this way.
Oh, go ahead.
The faith is the sort of the rules of the game, I guess you could say. Like, okay, we have a board game, right? And just the board game sitting on the table between us, all three of us, right? Like, it's just a piece of cardboard with a couple plastic pieces, okay? We need rules. We need to we need an objective and we need rules. Otherwise, we can do literally anything we want with the game. Um, that's the nihilistic void. The fact that if there are no rules and if there is no objective, then this game means nothing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but the rules are limitations, and so time. What we said earlier, time is a limitation, and so the people in the future in Tenet are breaking the rules of time. They are literally going back in time, and in that way, time loses its meaning. And if time is itself a limitation in the game, which is a rule of the game, then you see the disillusionment of those rules occurring in real time, no pun intended. And the heroes of the film are actively attempting to rebuild the things that are being dissolved by the people of the future who have lost faith in humanity. So the rules of the game create order and meaning. And I see that in this film because without the limitations, without the rules, again, that's the void. That's nihilism, and that's what Sator is falling into. Um,
And
with
arguably
those,
Joker.
yeah, Joker. How much of that? How much of a lie are our heroes enacting when they know that time itself can be broken, and yet they're fighting to uphold the tenets of time? Um, pause for effect. And
Yes.
thank you.
Frank and I are pausing for you.
How much of that is playing into Nolan's obsession with the noble lie, right? This idea that Lenny at the end of Memento is revealed to be living a lie. How noble it is another question. Um,
But that's
Dark,
like intentional though. Like he
yeah,
is making it so that way.
right.
It's not just like going
It's
with
the same in Inception. It doesn't
Mhm.
ultimately matter whether the
good point.
top falls or not. He's existing within a world that could theoretically be a dream. He doesn't care.
He doesn't
That's the
care.
noble lie,
Accepted his
right?
reality.
Right. He's
Right.
accepted his reality.
But
That's
it's also like
exactly
a
what
weird
these.
form of denial though too, don't you think, Tyler? Like to say like I mean because it's one thing to believe something because like Memento where he's got all these clues and then he goes with it and he feels like he has a purpose, but then to intentionally self-sabotage so that
Yes.
your future self cannot possibly have the tools needed to make the right decision is different. I don't know that
Okay.
Tenet is like a
That's
self-sabotage.
no. I think the heroes of this movie are looking at reality, and there's that quote that just because a piece of music ends doesn't mean you stop listening to it, right? They're that quote. Just because we're headed toward perhaps an assured destruction doesn't mean we're going to just annihilate ourselves or let ourselves be annihilated by the antinatalists of the future who want to destroy mankind.
Frank, I feel like you were going to say something and I'm worried you're going to forget your thought.
Well, I think it ties together that trilogy concept I was bringing up, I think, with Memento, Inception, and Tenet, where it's the evolution of this thought. Memento is succumbing to the nihilism that what I think would be my best reality now is what I'm going to go with. Forget truth, forget reality. Mm-hmm. My existence is my existence, and I'm going to go forward because without it, I have no purpose and I will be lost forever. Inception, it's a guy who does everything he possibly could, and in the end, he went, come what may. Like the reward I am given now, whether it's real or not, doesn't matter. I accept this reality. I did what I could. I tried my best. Tenet is the full, now we've reached the other side of that, of like, I will not accept this and I will continue to do everything I can because, I mean, you said something like, isn't that denial? I think there's a little bit of denial inside of faith. You have to deny a reality you're seeing to believe in something better because the world as is, and probably has always been, is a world that promotes us to choose against a moral good. It's much easier to exist in a like evil morality and be selfish and let like greed or your personal choices affect your own life and like not
That's
consider
the
what's
will to
around you.
power.
It's a lot, yeah, more, you're more rewarded easily that way. So to stand against that, to believe in an idea of a moral good or a purpose that's beyond your own is a defiant and somewhat delusional act. Like it has to be. And that's like the interesting thing of Tenet. Again, it's like it's all about knowledge divided as power, and you have to suppress the truth because the protagonist has to come to all of his realizations on his own terms. And that's what Neil is constantly fighting against. Like, if I just told you, would you have done the same thing? If this is now a truth I'm telling you, you might react negatively. You have to come find it on your own journey of discovery, which again is by the protagonist not accepting this, all the truths that he's consistently being told, other than like science literally happening in front of him. Then he
It's
accepts
also
it.
like very similar to Paul in Dune 2, where like everybody is telling him like don't go south, don't do this, don't do that, but until Paul figures it out himself and says, "Okay, this is what I'm going to do come what may," sort of thing, it doesn't matter. And I mean that's
Well,
definitely true to life, that you just aren't going to act unless you're personally ready.
Dune 2 is an interesting counterpoint, though, because he's being told he's being built upon a lie, and he chooses to live it out anyway. So
yes,
there's a
but he doesn't act until like they wanted him to do it way sooner. I mean, his mom wanted him to do it much sooner than when he actually decides
No, I thought
to.
they didn't want him to do it at all.
No, his mother
Well,
does.
his mother's been trying to supplant him as a false messiah the whole time, but
That's what I mean. But he did it in his own time, is all I'm saying.
He did it.
Like,
That
he
doesn't
didn't
make
you're
do it
talking
until,
about readiness. Go ahead.
He didn't
Tyler.
do it. He didn't do it until he discovered that he was a Harkonnen. That's the
Right, and
reckoning
Right.
of the shadow self. That's the integration of the evil that you are capable of, and then
Right.
controlling that. The hero is supposed to control that for the better, which is what the heroes in Tenets do, and Tenet does. But the problem with Paul, of course, the reason why that final 45 minutes of that movie feels so devastating and horrifying is because he's doing it in a not so great
Misled.
way. Yeah.
And he's doing it for himself at the end of the day. He says it's for prophecy, for uniting the people, but it is ultimately just for his own gain and to control the universe in the way he now perceives it should be, which
Is that true? I don't think that. Is that a fact?
There's a
Frank's
myth.
like guessing.
There's a mythic portion of Frank Herbert's own like world that's actually the only. I mean, yes, Frank, you are correct. He actually chooses that route because that is the route upon which Chani will live the longest.
Mm.
Oh,
so you got
so in that sense, it's not
there.
selfish.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
it's still entirely selfish. And
no, but it's coming out of love for her, though.
I don't.
That's more selfless than him doing it just for himself.
I don't buy that one bit.
Well,
his power...
millions of people will die, so that's bad.
Yes.
Yeah. But also there's this idea that comes up in the later Dune books that's the golden path, that he actually had no choice in which.
That's what I was going to get at. I was going to ask Frank, okay, if we don't have a choice on the path, and then in Tenet, it's literally structured to say, like, the future is coming in and saying, yeah, like, no matter what you do. And then the protagonist and Neil and everyone saying, well, I know that this is how it ends up, but I'm going to believe it anyway. That's the part that I feel like has to have a denial component to it. But Frank, you're already saying that, like,
I think
you think that's inherent anyway.
I think Frank is onto something, because I think that's part and parcel of having faith in a way, is contending with the fact that, we may very well live in a sort of a rational, materialistic world where, these illogical religious concepts aren't real. But that's not the question. The question isn't whether they're real or not. The question is whether or not they're true. And I think Nolan is positing that they're actually as true as it can possibly get.
Okay.
For someone to attain meaning and to strive for the truth and for the good in the face of annihilation and nihilism, that's the heroic path.
I mean, you can take this to the most basic literal, like the world was flat once upon a time. So, but somebody had to be in defiance of that to realize like we could go further and the world is actually round. Like, you have to be in denial of the reality you're being told exists. And again, this can be co-opted in every which way you want to look at it. It can be for forces of good. It can be for forces of evil just as easily. Like most systems of belief and thought, like not just religion, you can take it into economic systems, you can take it into political systems, it doesn't matter. Most are not born from ill content or with malicious intent. Most, not all. Some are explicitly for malicious intent, but most are not. And then it's through development and change and progress in time that things can get warped and set down different paths. So again, yeah, I think there's always something you have to buck against what you're being told for change to happen. I think that's like an inherent truth in humanity, because we can
But then
float
at what
through
point do you accept it though? Like at what point
I don't think
is
you
it
ever should. There's no such thing as acceptance. There's no answer. We're going to go on forever until we're in oblivion. Like that's just what it is. And to wrestle with that is impossible because we're conscious and because we want answers and because most things have a tangible truth. But like if we're talking philosophically in some grand sense, like there's never going to, or I guess theoretically one day there could be an answer. Somebody's there at the end of the road to tell you something or whatever. But you know, that's a faith and belief in that, which is to go
right?
against evidence presented in our daily reality. And it's not to say anybody's right or wrong. It's just inherent in us as human beings. I think even to change ourselves, we can get lost in our day-to-day lives and so clouded by what's going on. Like you're just flowing through the motions. But if you want to change yourself, you have to go against your own current reality of how it's
This is water.
yeah and that too. So I mean bringing up Paul and Dune 2 is an interesting counterpoint, because that's to me the negative side of a Tenet. Like he has all the power and possibility to forge a better future. He's not being sold, but instead he decides to skirt into the exact lane that's he had confirmed. That would be like if the people in Tenet were like, okay, the world's going to end. Let's just go to Pizza Hut and call it a day. Like I think those are like the equivocal things. Paul's told like your whole life's a lie. You're literally being bred to do this thing. Everybody in the universe is going to believe you, but it's not true, but go with it and do it so that we can have power. And he goes, yeah, sounds good. And he goes like,
you don't think that he believes that it's true?
Okay, well, no, there's no
okay,
he's not a messiah though. It was literally created by the Bene Gesserit. Like it's a lie that's been implanted for eons of existence, if I'm not mistaken, in Dune. They've been like day one behind the scenes planting all the seeds. Paul's not a true messiah, and that's like the fault of Paul. Like he chooses to live the lie instead of trying to rise above it and create a new truth.
The Bene Gesserit, in a way, are kind of like the witches in Macbeth.
Yep.
They can see into the seeds of time. That's what Banquo says about the witches. They can see into the seeds of time, but they can only do that, the Bene Gesserit, because they've planted the seeds of time. Paul finds himself in a realm where he's a byproduct of the seeds that have been planted, and he has to directly contend with it. I do think where Tenet and Dune Part 2 cross paths the most is in the fact that both protagonists in both stories end up fighting themselves, because Feyd-Rautha is a direct mirror image of Paul Atreides. Paul Atreides, who, by the way, Atreides, Atreus, the Atreus line, of course, takes us back to the Iliad by Homer and Agamemnon.
Gotta go back to the Iliad.
But we're not going to go down that route.
Okay, Tyler.
We made it this far.
So the point I'm making is, Achilles has to fight himself at the end of the Iliad. He has to fight Hector, which is Hector is wearing his own armor, so that he's fighting himself.
It's like mirror images here, And
Yeah,
then in Tenet, they literally fight themselves.
Anakin Skywalker fights himself when he's fighting Obi-Wan Kenobi. Fade
Mhm.
Routha is he is Paul Atreides. I mean, they're literally cousins. And there's even a kind of a subtextual erotic notion to the fact that they would have actually been married had Paul been born as a girl, but because remember, Lady Jessica was supposed to give birth to a girl,
Uh-huh.
but she willingly she because she has the ability to do so, she wills a boy into
Change the
existence
gender.
for her Duke, and that
Because she wanted the
girl
false
would
prophecy to be her
right.
prophecy.
Yeah, that girl would have
Man, y'all are
married Fade
really
Routha.
ruining Dune for me.
I
I had
know.
an entirely different read completely, and I'm just like slowly realizing how wrong I am.
Well,
No.
Ugh.
you can never be
Yeah.
wrong about a piece of
Nah.
art. You can maybe
No, but if there's like a authorial intention and there's like an actual answer to these questions.
From what I understand, he wrote
these
Dune
prophecies.
Messiah because not enough people understood his point of Dune, which was that
Paul
Paul is not a
Paul
good guy.
is the bad guy. Yeah.
Right, which I did not feel at all in any way. But I mean,
So
to be
scary.
fair, I'm glad that I didn't figure this out until now.
Well,
or
okay.
like that I didn't do an episode about it. I would have been like, yeah, this guy's great.
So the
Everyone would been like,
protagonist,
Amy.
the protagonist has to fight himself. That's the point that I was trying to make.
Right, that's the point you're trying to make.
That is inherent in this sort of a metaphysical reality that we all are contending with ourselves. That the movie
and the shadow side, like you said.
Right. Yeah. The movie itself is two philosophies moving forward and backwards through time. One proposes to be progressive, but is actually regressive because it's actively seeking to destroy humanity.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is moving toward a restoration or perhaps even a resurrection of humanity, if you want to get biblical. So there's that. But there's also, so not only that's the two philosophies of the film that are working against one another, but then you also have your own hero kind of working against himself on occasion. I mean, he literally has to fight himself in that wickedly amazing and awesome fight sequence where he's like, squeaking across the floor and doing like, snow angels and cartwheels off the walls and everything. And it's just like, what is happening right now? But yeah, that internal fight reflects the external battle as well, for different reasons perhaps. But it's ultimately moving toward the same goal of reintegration and resurrection.
Alignment. Okay, guys, we could talk about this till the end of time. We're going to end this very deep discussion. I appreciate you guys so much. With you guys' top 5 favorite Christopher Nolan films. We're gonna do it.
Can I just jump in real fast with
Frank,
one last thing?
I knew you were gonna do this. You have never not done this to use a double negative. Go ahead.
I just wanted to highlight the quote that matters the most to me from Tenet, because I don't think I ever got to say it. The Neil says it at the end. The what's happened, which is an expression of faith in the mechanics of the world. It's not an excuse to do nothing. They were always there to do it, which is why any of it happens, through their choice to not believe this predestined future, which then becomes their predestined past, which then becomes their never-ending loop of current reality. It's everything to me, and it literally makes me teary-eyed hearing him say it. While it's like he's literally leaving to go die and accept his fate. He's the Jesus figure even more than the protagonist. Like he's gonna sacrifice himself for sure in this moment to ensure everything. I don't know. I think it sums it all up better than we did in this last however long. But I just needed to highlight it because I think
I think it's an important quote to end on. It's really important because I think the film itself is a statement, an expression of faith in the mechanics of the world and the order of the world and the balance of the world.
Well said, Tyler. Okay.
Now I will let
Frank?
you continue.
No, go ahead with your 5.
Oh,
your top 5 favorite Nolan films, but don't give us any explanations, just your 5.
Okay. Right outside the 5 is Dark Knight Rises. Okay. And then 5 would be The Dark Knight, 4 is The Prestige, 3 would be Inception, 2's Memento, and 1's Tenet.
Okay, Tyler?
And Tenet are both top
are
100,
both
like
tied for one.
best.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interstellar, Inception, The Prestige. Those would be 5, 4, 3, and two and
Right. You
one
guys are going in opposite.
two and one are interchangeable. Tenet and Oppenheimer. One is a better movie. One is my favorite. Tenet is my favorite. Oppenheimer is Christopher Nolan's best film. So
I love the meticulous nature of just like honing in on what you guys actually mean. It's wonderful. This is like a cinephile thing to the max. And Frank, you are like that with your rating system. I won't get off on a tangent, but where you're like, oh, I gave this a 3.5 and now it's a 4, and these are the reasons why it went up. Like you're like that with like when you rewatch things, you always have a good explanations as to
Frank
why
will
the
send me a
rating
text
shifted.
message. He'll send me a text out of nowhere and be like, by the way, this movie moved up to number 44.
Right.
Like,
Exactly. Yes. He is like the king of this mindset.
I need law and
Help.
order in my consumption. I need rules. I need a list. I need to say this is better than that. Like,
you need the rules of the game.
otherwise I don't get what's going on. They can't all be equal. It's just how it is.
It's total chaos in your mind until you actually put them into parameters.
Exactly. Which is
I
what
get
we
it.
all need.
Yes.
We
I
want
am those
Amy's top
parameters for
5.
you too, guys.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. So my top 5 is Memento is number 1. I'm not going to do it in reverse order because I'm not crazy. Memento, and then Batman Begins, Prestige. I think, did I put that? I'll put Prestige there. And then, what did I say?
Batman Begins is number 2?
Yeah.
Batman Begins is number 2.
So crazy.
That is awesome.
It's so good. You know what, though? I will say this. In the rewatch, I felt like it was an addiction film. So that might be why it's like where I'm at with him being trained on the mountain and everything. There was so much metaphors for like becoming sober, where like Batman was like Bruce was at his rock bottom. So a lot of that really spoke to me in this rewatch, because that might be why.
That's right.
Okay, I'll put Prestige before Dark Knight because I didn't like it as much this time, which is blasphemous. And then 5 is Oppenheimer. OP.
So which movies do we share on our lists?
I think it's just The Prestige, right?
It's just The Prestige,
Great
which is
movie.
prestigious.
Amy, I'm sorry, at the very end, just a random. Have you ever seen Coherence?
Oh my gosh, great movie.
Yeah, I feel like that almost would fit this better than Tenet. But you know what? We already did Tenet, so that's okay.
Tyler, have you seen Coherence?
I don't know.
Okay, it's like multiple selves.
Yeah.
It's really cool. And it's like a low budget movie that does it really, really well.
It sounds familiar. I may have seen it.
It's a sci-fi.
I don't think I have.
Trippy sci-fi, whatever.
It's really good.
But then I think it focuses in a lot about the like finding the best version of yourself and contending with the worst versions of you. And so maybe
except it's like horror kind of, because it's violent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and nobody in it is a famous person.
Self-discovery is often a horrific journey.
And that's a great note to end on, Frank. Thank you. Self-discovery is a horrific journey, and Paul Atreides is a monster.
Yeah.
These are my takeaways.
And Neil is the best. We should shed
Neil
tears
is the Christ-like figure. And Tyler, we didn't get into the noble lie, so you may have to write about this.
That's okay. We got into it a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll have to explain that later. But my pleasure to have you guys on. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like conceptually I like the movie a lot more now. So mission accomplished.
Nice.
Yes, that's good to hear.
We'll see you at the movies.